Today, I decided to do something different. Instead of getting lost in the usual routine with its incessant tasks and commitments, I resolved to take a day to walk. With no set destination, I just let my feet lead me, allowing myself to observe the world around me with a renewed perspective. As soon as I left the house, the first thing I noticed was the disturbing quietness of the streets. Sure, there was the noise of cars, the murmur of conversations, but at the same time, a sense of emptiness hung in the air. It was as if everyone was physically present, but their minds and hearts were elsewhere. While walking, I passed by a cafe and decided to go in for a takeaway coffee. Observing the people inside, I noticed something curious. Almost everyone had their eyes fixed on their screens, fingers sliding incessantly as if they were in a frantic search for something, perhaps a distraction, a connection, a validation. And there, at that moment, a question arose in my mind. Are we truly present in the lives we are living? I continued my walk and noticed that even on busy streets, there was a sense of isolation. Each person seemed to be in their own world, connected to a virtual reality that, ironically, disconnected them from the here and now. I saw young people taking photos, not to capture a special moment, but to post on social media, seeking likes and comments that somehow validated their existence. Then came that question in my mind. What are we searching for? Why are we so desperate for approval? Why do we care so much about the opinions of strangers on social media? This constant need to be seen, to be approved, was consuming everyone, creating a void that seemed impossible to fill. And while my thoughts wandered, my feet continued to carry me forward. As I continued my walk, I decided to go to the city park. I always found that place a refuge, a space where one could find peace and perhaps answers. As soon as I entered, I noticed the beauty of nature around me, the trees gently swaying in the wind, the sound of birds singing, and the sun filtering its light through the leaves. But even in this idyllic setting, something seemed to be missing. I saw a group of children playing in the playground, but upon closer look, I noticed that some of them also had smartphones in their hands. A boy was sliding down the slide while holding a tablet, his attention divided between the screen and the play. Technology, which was supposed to connect us, seemed to be pulling us away from the present moment, even for the children. Walking further, I passed by a couple sitting on a bench. Both were silent, each immersed in their own phone. Physical proximity did not seem to translate into a real connection. They were together, yet at the same time, so distant. And again, a question echoed in my mind. Are we forgetting how to truly connect with the people around us? As I pondered this, I sat down on a bench near the lake. I observed a group of teenagers taking selfies and laughing. They seemed happy, but it was a fleeting, almost superficial happiness. Everything revolved around how they would be perceived by others when they posted those photos. The present moment seemed to hold less value than the future reactions on social media. I found myself reflecting on my own life. How many times had I prioritized a well-taken photo over truly enjoying the moment? How often had I found myself incessantly checking social media for notifications, for external validation? The realization was uncomfortable. The emptiness I observed in others was also a part of me. Sitting there, contemplating the lake, I noticed something curious. The waters were calm, reflecting the blue sky above. It was a perfect metaphor. Often our surface may seem tranquil, but inside us there is a storm of insecurities, fears, and a constant longing for approval. And thus, another question formed. How can we find true peace and satisfaction in a world that constantly pushes us to seek external validation? I stood up and continued my walk, leaving the park behind. I began to walk through the busier streets of the city. The change in scenery was drastic. The park offered a respite, a pause from the hustle, but here people were enveloped in constant haste. Every face I saw seemed burdened with worries, every hurried step indicating a packed schedule. I passed by a coffee shop where the lines were long. People waited impatiently for their coffees, many repeatedly checking their phones, perhaps looking for an important email or a social media update. The impatience was palpable, as if each second lost was an irreparable delay in their busy lives. Then I came across a middle-aged man sitting on a park bench. He seemed different from the others, as he wasn't holding a phone. Instead, he looked around, observing people. His eyes reflected a mix of sadness and understanding. I decided to sit next to him, curious to know what he was thinking. After a few minutes of silence, he began to speak, as if sensing my curiosity. "Have you ever stopped to notice how we're all running, but we don't really know where to?" he asked. His voice was calm, but laden with a wisdom that seemed to come from many lived experiences. I nodded in agreement, and he continued. "I see so many people trapped in their routines, working hard to reach an ideal of success that isn't always their own. And when they finally get there, they realize it's not enough, that something is still missing." His words resonated deeply with me. How many times had I felt that dissatisfaction, that emptiness, even after achieving a goal? He then looked at me and said, "The emptiness we often feel comes from a disconnection with ourselves. We're so busy trying to be what others expect us to be that we forget to ask ourselves what we truly want. And in this process, we lose our essence." These words stayed with me as I said goodbye to that wise man and continued my walk. His perspective made me reflect on the hustle and bustle of the city, on how we're always so busy but often missing what really matters. And this led me to a new question. How can we reconnect with our essence in a world that constantly pushes us to be someone we're not? The city streets were crowded, but I felt lonelier than ever. It was as if each person was an island, isolated in their own incessant search for something they couldn't always define. And as my steps echoed on the concrete, I realized that maybe the answer lay in stopping the external search and starting to look more within ourselves. As I walked through the city center, I reached the commercial area, where glass and steel skyscrapers dominated the skyline. It was lunchtime, and the streets were filled with professionals in suits and formal dresses, all with expressions of haste and worry. The pace here was different, more frenetic, as if every second had a high price to pay. I stopped in front of a large corporate building and watched the constant flow of people coming in and out. Many had their eyes fixed on their phone screens, even while walking. The sense of urgency was almost palpable, as if time were a scarce and precious resource not to be wasted. I decided to enter the building and went to the food court, where I observed a group of colleagues having lunch together. Despite sitting at the same table, each was focused on their own screen, exchanging only occasional words. The scene made me question, are we really communicating or just coexisting? At a nearby table, a young woman seemed to be in a video conference, her expression serious and tense. She spoke quickly, her eyes rarely leaving the screen. When she finished the call, she sighed deeply and ran her hand over her face, visibly exhausted. This made me think about the constant pressure many face in the corporate environment, where productivity is often measured in hours worked and goals achieved, leaving little room for breaks and reflection. I remembered a friend who worked at a large company and had recently confessed to feeling exhausted and unmotivated. He mentioned how the relentless pursuit of results and recognition was draining his energy and, more worryingly, his sense of purpose. His words now made even more sense. The emptiness that many feel in the corporate world seems to be fueled by this endless race for success and validation. As I reflected on this, an announcement over the loudspeaker caught my attention. Remember to take breaks and take care of your mental health. The contrast between the message and the environment around me was stark. It was as if the reminder was a desperate attempt to reclaim something that was already lost for many there. The balance between work and personal life, the ability to disconnect and simply be. I left the building with a sense of unease. The corporate world, with all its efficiency and productivity, seemed to be stifling the humanity of its inhabitants. And again, a question formed in my mind. How can we find a healthy balance in an environment that constantly pushes us beyond our limits? I continued my walk, trying to digest all these observations and questions. The emptiness of modern society seemed to be present in all aspects of life, from leisure to work. As I walked on, I came across a residential neighborhood. The houses lined up side by side, each with its well-kept garden, seemed to be the perfect setting for an ideal life. But, as I had noticed throughout the day, appearances often deceive. I passed a house where a family was gathered in the backyard. They were sitting in chairs around a table, but the scene was familiar, each with their own electronic device. Even though they were together, they were distant. The children were playing on their tablets. The parents were checking emails or browsing social media. It was as if they were physically present but emotionally absent. Continuing my walk, I saw a young couple walking down the sidewalk. They were holding hands, but both had their eyes fixed on their phones. It was a sad image, the physical connection there, but the emotional one completely disconnected. This made me reflect on how technology, which should bring us closer, often creates invisible barriers between us. Further along, I encountered a childhood friend I hadn't seen in years. We decided to stop at a cafe to catch up. During our conversation, I noticed something unsettling. Every time her phone vibrated, she would glance at it, losing the thread of our conversation. The interaction became fragmented, superficial, and it made me think, are we truly present when we are with the people who matter? These observations led me to reflect on my own relationships. How many times had I done the same? How many conversations had I missed? How many moments had slipped away because I was distracted by a screen? The disconnection I was noticing around me was in fact a reflection of my own disconnection. I decided to conduct an experiment. I turned off my phone and put it in my pocket. Suddenly, the world around me seemed different. The colors were more vibrant, the sounds more distinct. Every interaction became more genuine, more present, and I realized that this small change had a profound impact on the quality of my time and my connections. I resumed observing the people around me. At a corner, I saw an elderly man sitting on a bench reading a book. He looked so serene, so absorbed in his reading, completely disconnected from the digital frenzy. It was a stark contrast to everything I had observed so far. Could it be that true connection lies in the simplicity of being present in the moment, away from digital distractions? As I continued my journey through the city streets, I came across a square where a group of elderly people were playing chess. They were deeply engaged in the game, their expressions full of concentration and enjoyment. Without technological distractions, they were fully present, savoring each other's company and the intellectual challenge of the game. It was a vivid example of what it means to be truly present. Intrigued, I approached and sat on a nearby bench to observe. The scene reminded me of times before the ubiquity of smartphones and the internet, when face-to-face interactions were the norm and digital distractions were practically non-existent. I found myself wondering, what can we learn from these past generations about the importance of living in the present moment? As I pondered this, one of the elderly men, noticing my interest, invited me to join a game. I accepted the invitation with a smile, and soon we were playing. During the game, we talked about life and how things had changed over the years. He shared stories from his youth, when afternoons were spent in long conversations and simple, yet deeply meaningful activities. These stories made me reflect on the simplicity and depth of human interactions before the digital age. There was an authenticity, a quality in relationships that seemed to be lost in our modern era. With each move of the chess pieces, I realized how much I was learning about the importance of slowing down, appreciating simple moments, and being truly present. When the game ended, I thanked my new friend and continued my walk, feeling lighter and more reflective. I decided to visit a street fair happening nearby. The smell of fresh food, the sound of lively conversations, and the sight of people interacting face to face brought me a sense of joy and connection. I walked past stalls of fruits, vegetables, and crafts, observing how the vendors interacted with customers. It was a genuine exchange where looks, smiles, and words had real significance. Each transaction seemed to be more than just a simple purchase. It was a moment of human connection, a pause in the incessant flow of modern life. While buying some fruits, I talked with the vendor about the origins of the products. She spoke passionately about her work, about how each item was cultivated with care and dedication. Her joy in sharing this information was contagious. And again, I found myself reflecting on the richness of human interactions when we are truly present. These experiences at the fair taught me that to fill the void we often feel, we might need to relearn how to live in the present moment, to value small interactions, and to slow down. And this led me to another question. How can we integrate these simple and meaningful practices into our daily lives to feel more connected and satisfied? At the end of the day, I found myself back at the starting point, but something inside me had changed. The walk, the observations, the interactions, all contributed to a new understanding of the emptiness that many of us feel in modern society. I arrived home and sat on the couch, reflecting on everything I had experienced. The emptiness I observed on the streets, on social media, in the corporate world, and in personal relationships seemed to be linked to a common point: the lack of presence in the moment. We are so busy trying to meet external expectations, seeking approval, and distracting ourselves with technology that we forget to live in the present. I decided to turn off all devices and sat there in silence. I closed my eyes and focused on my breathing, feeling each inhale and exhale. This simple act of mindfulness brought a sense of calm and internal connection that I hadn't experienced in a long time. I remembered the words of the wise man I met on the park bench. The emptiness we often feel comes from a disconnection with ourselves. He was right. Being present in the moment is a path to reconnecting with our own essence. It is in the present that we find true connections, genuine experiences, and inner peace. I decided to make this a habit. I began to set aside moments of my day to simply be present, away from screens and distractions. I learned to appreciate the small details, the song of birds, the taste of fresh coffee, the unhurried conversation with a friend. The emptiness that once seemed so vast began to fill with these moments of presence and connection. And this led me to an important conclusion. What really matters is not the number of likes, the rush to achieve goals, or the relentless pursuit of external approval. What matters are the small moments of authenticity and presence, where we find meaning and satisfaction. Disconnect from time to time. Allow yourself to live in the present moment. Appreciate the little things and truly connect with the people around you. It is in these moments that we find the true richness of life. Remember, the emptiness you feel does not have to be permanent. It can be filled with presence, with true connection, and with the simplicity of fully lived moments. If you like this video, subscribe to the channel and leave a like.